The information in this podcast is not legal advice and should not be construed as such. It is for informational and educational purposes only.
Welcome to Resource Sessions. I'm Gwendolyn Sterk of Sterk Family Law, and I'm honored and privileged to have my friend Sean Sebold of Sebold Capital Wealth Management with me today. Hi, Sean. How are you today?
Great. How are you, Gwen?
Good. I'm super excited to get to talk about different things. I've known you for a lot of years. You do a great job out there in Naperville with your wealth management company. And we really want to talk about transition planning. And I know that it can be in a lot of different areas. So your firm does a lot of work with transition planning for businesses, right?
That's correct. We do a lot of work in terms of how companies start, and they start thinking about, I'm going to make a transition. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to process it. What are all the moving pieces? So we take a look at it and help them through that.
And the same thing is really true in divorce. You know, a lot of times we don't talk about that, but really there are business divorces and there are human divorces. And they all involve humans, but really in the divorce world, we get into a lot of that transition planning. And a lot of people don't even know where to start. You know, one of the things that I know about divorce is generally, and it doesn't matter if it's male or female, somebody has a stronger financial background or knowledge and information about the family structure, and somebody doesn't generally. So tell us, what do you think the first step is for somebody to really start thinking about their future if they know that the family is going to dissolve?
Well, item number one is first get all the facts of all the assets, and that's not just balance sheet and what you have. It's what's the current status of each thing, because when you go through any kind of transition, meaning a divorce, you're going to have different types of assets that have different characteristics. So, I mean, a house is one characteristic. It is not very liquid. It's very expensive to buy and sell houses.
Sure.
So it's not a liquid asset. You can't split it up. You can't say half and half if you want to live in half and half. That's an untenable situation. You also have debt components associated with it. So that's one type of asset that you look at and you go, okay, that's part of it. And the next step is, what if there's a business involved? So is it a service business? Is it valuations of business just from a valuation perspective, on a market perspective, is an art form unto itself. But when
Right.
you say the valuation as of this effective date is X, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. And again, it's going to have to do with taxes, cash flow, liquidity. So all those things are super important. So step one is, it's start to look at what the numbers are, what the values are. Then it has to be what's the liquidity of each one of these things. And third, how do we get the divisibility of these things in an equitable fashion? Because sometimes it's going to be swapping one asset for another, which means you might give up some liquidity, but you'll get a little bit more equity. So there's that role when you go through there. So step one is, let's figure it out where everything is. Step two is, let's take a look at all these assets from a liquidity perspective, and then a valuation perspective in terms of when that valuation has to occur.
Sure. And I also would add to that a tax consequence, right? So depending on the type of asset, you might have capital gain tax there. There might be something significant that has to be viewed and really can impact the value that you have at the end of the day.
Yeah, you're always going to have to adjust for those taxes. So where the most common form of tax adjustment is going to come within maybe a qualified plan, because if you say I'm going to swap a business for a qualified plan, well, the tax structures are going to be very different. But with qualified plans, you can go through that quadra, that, and you can split those with regards to equal division on that. But when you get to a business, again, it might have a very low basis, which means if you sell it, there's lots of capital gains associated with it. It could have high basis. So that you're going to have to do some adjustments when you do the modeling for how to split those assets, as to what's going to make the most sense. Because, if it may not be an equal split that makes the most sense for both parties.
Well, that's correct. And in addition to that, now that maintenance and child support is based upon all income from all sources, it also can have an impact on that, although you could agree to exclude certain things, but you have to be considering it from the very beginning. A common question, and just focusing in on wealth management in and of itself. So somebody has a stock account or they have mutual funds. I think mutual funds are a little easier to divide. Wouldn't you agree?
It depends on what type.
Okay.
Mutual funds, I mean, you can split stocks. I mean, the only issue you would have with individual stocks that you can't split are going to be stocks with a really big value. And I'll take the biggest stock for consideration, which would be Berkshire Hathaway, which
Yeah.
trades for over $500,000 per share. So
Right.
clearly, if you had 3 shares, it's going to be a little bit difficult to split those. You could split, two to one, but you can't split halves. So from that perspective, stocks are going to be a little more difficult. If you have stocks, you're going to have, if it's a taxable account, you'll have a little bit better idea of how you can split the tax basis. So that might be a little bit easier with stocks. But when you get to mutual funds, it really depends on how, if it's a taxable account, is it an active mutual fund? Is it a passive mutual fund? And then, how are you going to split the basis there? Because once you file a tax return with regards to how you calculate your cost, there's several different ways you can manage your cost in a mutual fund. You can take average cost. You can have specific identification lots. So that's going to come into play when you make that split. So that's where you can have some difficulties with the mutual funds versus the stocks.
Got it. And, in addition to that, and I hate to go back to the support obligation, but in a stock, you could really defer your income off of it, except if it's a dividend stock, as compared to a mutual fund where you're going to report it every year. So when you're looking at those types of cases and you're trying to trade assets for assets, I also add to people now in our new environment where we look at a division not only of the assets, but of income, it really becomes kind of a new world from that perspective.
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, you've got to, especially if you're talking about privately held stock, you're going to have issues with regards to, where's the retained income, the retained earnings, how's that going to play into it? So yeah, those calculations can get rather complicated. And when you look at that, you really have to understand, where is that coming in? Where is that calculating? Where is that value for that business coming from? Is it long-term contracts? Can those long-term contracts have ability to change when billing happens? So when you have your own privately held business, you have the ability to change the way financials look based on what you want to have happen. And most of the time you're doing it for a good purpose, a good business purpose. But if things are, if something in a short run in a 12 to 18-month period of time, maybe we don't close that contract until afterwards. Maybe we do close that contract right now. So things can happen to change the impact on the income statement, which goes directly to your point. So yeah, that's an excellent point to consider.
100% moving forward then is we get into this word in kind. So I have a lot of questions from people, and we put in our documents, if you're going to divide an investment account, you got to do it on an in-kind basis. It's a common thing. People come and say, you're speaking another language to me. Could you please clarify it? So Sean, from your perspective, what does it mean to do an in-kind division?
An in-kind division means that you're not going to do it based on dollar values. So you're going to do it based on the value of what you're splitting. So I'll see if you can give you an example here on how this actually can work in the investment world. So just think about this one. There was one point where Russia paid their bonds in kind, but the in kind was actually vodka. It was called a PIK bond. So instead of paying it in rubles or dollars, they said, I'm paying it in kind. Here, you get a case of vodka, or however it played out to be. So just from a memory perspective, think about that when you hear the word in kind. It means you're going to get something other than money. So when you're doing in-kind splits for, say, stocks, regular stocks, publicly traded stocks, that means if you have 100 shares of Apple, one person would get 50 shares, the other would get 50 shares. Well, what's the dollar value? We don't know, because we don't know when they're actually going to be split, but you'll get the shares in kind, so both will get equal values. So now it's a little bit more difficult when you're looking with privately held companies, because if you say, I want half of the company, okay, am I going to get that in kind just from a corporate perspective, or is there other considerations that might be in kind that corporation may have? So, but that's what you need to think about whenever you hear the word in kind. It means you're going to get property of some sort, usually, and not just dollars.
That raises the real important question, which is really bringing on a manager or wealth consultant as part of the divorce, because you can get into these situations and you're working with your divorce attorney and everybody says you're going to get half, but when you really turn to implement it, it can look a lot different. So getting somebody involved as early on as possible is really good advice. And tell us why.
That is really good advice, unless you're really sophisticated about this stuff, because there are issues that can bite you. For example, I mean, again, we talked about the liquidity of some items. So if you got, half of an estate, but it's not liquid, and your partner got the other half, but it's liquid, well, that might put you in a very difficult situation. Let's use the most common one, which is, the house. Okay. One spouse gets to stay in the house, but the house needs two incomes to support the debt. Well, if the income is now being split, then what effectively with the property split is you're forcing that person who owns the house, who gets the house, you're forcing them to sell the property because they can't afford the mortgage. So you have to do a really good job in terms of looking at those assets to say, this might be an equity split with regards to dollar value, but it may not be a tenable split to keep your lifestyle the way it is. So those are really important things to do. Wealth advisors like myself can help through that process to say, what's the liquidity needs, not just the value needs, in order to make this split, work for both parties.
Sure. And then it really gets into the next question. And I like to train younger attorneys that might work at our office and other people, the question of what if? What if X? What if Y? Because I think that sometimes people look at the immediate, just like you're explaining. They're looking on paper, it's 50-50, but they don't ask the question, well, what if X happens or what if Y happens? And what's your experience with that?
My experience with that is usually where you have differing values or differing understanding, as you mentioned earlier, differing understandings of finance. Because again, when you look at it on paper, things can look very clear. It's 50-50. But if you aren't aware of all the implications, looking into the future and saying, okay, will I be able to afford this mortgage payment? Or, okay, I got, let's say, for example, if you split a privately held company and one person got the real estate and one person got the business, ooh, okay, how is that going to work going forward? Do we have to renegotiate lease payments? How do I get my income? What if I want to sell? So looking into the future to say, if this split happened today, what are my obligations to the split and to the assets in this split over the next 3 years, 5 years? And am I going to be comfortable managing that? Yeah. So, I mean, even rental property, that can be an issue too. Oh, well, one person managed it, the other didn't. That can be a problem 2, 3, 4 years down the road if we don't have good management responsibility to handle those kind of assets.
Right. And I think sometimes people look just at the immediate. What does my family situation look now? Oh, I don't want to disrupt the children. Well, that's great. But when they're teenagers, they don't care. Sorry. And they're going to disrupt you in a little while because they're going to be off and on with their life and college and something else. So I think that long-term impact's important. And that goes back to your wealth planning. So when somebody's getting out of divorce, when you sit down with them and talk to them, I mean, you're really trying to put a plan together for the future, right?
We're trying to make sure that what we've got from an asset perspective, from an income perspective, will provide them with the life that they want. I mean, that's the most important thing. I mean, these are not always, amiable circumstances, but you have to know after, when you agree to that, what does your life look like going forward? What is it going to force you to do with regards to the assets you have? If you're the primary income earner, how much are you going to you're going to lose of that? If you're getting money, how long will you be able to do that? And how long will that last? Or will you have to look for other employment for you to achieve the things that you now want to achieve? And that's, I think really the hardest part of that. It's, going through something like this it's not easy. So you have to come to grips with the split, and then it's, what are my goals that are now that they're mine, and understanding those and understanding what that split will eventually get you and how your life is going to look. That is a really, really hard part of this. Generally, it takes a while before you can get to the point of, I'm ready to do my goal planning now. I'm ready to understand I'm a single now. How am I going to do that? So that part is really hard, and going through that with somebody else who understands the makeup of your finances and what it can achieve for you, I think is really important and really good advice.
And I think it's real important to get that immediate, even before the divorce is finalized, and certainly for sure after the divorce is finalized, because your life can't, for neither party, it's never going to be 100% the same. It's just simple math. If we take two incomes, put the assets together, it's going to be a different lifestyle than if we divide them, right? There's always going to be that consequence, and people have a hard time facing that. And I think you give really good advice for people to come out earlier. So what does that look like for somebody? They're going through a divorce. They're saying, okay, I'm hearing you. I really got to get a handle. I got to get my arms around this, but I feel a little paralyzed. I got a divorce attorney. I'm a little nervous about taking that next step. How do they get to you? What will that planning look like for them?
Well, the first step is again coming to grips with this is going to change things, and then it's starting to understand, especially if they're dependents, how is that going to work? I mean, you know a lot of the visitation, and that's going to change how we spend our money. That's going to change how we do things with the family. So it's coming, and then it's opening up, and again, that's really, really hard. And it's saying, what's happening? How is my life going to change? Because you have to confront some things that you don't want to change, but are going to have to. And that's a very, very difficult part. But it's just opening up and saying, this is where I am. Here's where I want to go. And then again, taking that advice and saying, here's where I can get to. And here are the changes that can be made. Because as a wealth advisor in these circumstances, it's first stepping out and understanding what's happened, what emotions we're going through, then looking at the assets, then looking at where we can get, and then making little baby steps to get there. Because you don't want to make very big steps and very big changes when this happens. You want to take baby steps that you can understand what it's doing, how it's impacting you, especially if you're not the financial guru in the household. Because again, big changes, you just have to be very careful with them in these kind of situations, because you might not be used to them. You might be used to something, and you might, make a mistake by saying, whoops, I shouldn't have done that, which will happen, but you want to keep those mistakes to a minimum, especially if you're not the financial guru of the household.
100%. And, I think that people look at it, they either are shameful, they're embarrassed about the situation. They also might be simply having a hard time understanding, and they feel stupid. I don't mean to use a word that kids would say you can't talk about, but I think that's the emotion that some people have. And it's okay to have that emotion. But look, and I know that you would be the same way. If you came to me and asked me a question about cancer, all I could do is refer you to maybe a cancer doctor I've seen or met along life's journey or had a friend go to, right? But I couldn't help you with cancer. And just like you have to admit that some people just don't have this training, but by coming to a wealth advisor, getting a team together, they can do that. And it's simple to look at it kind of in hindsight, but at the time it's very hard. So what would you say to that person that's kind of struggling with that or feeling embarrassed?
Well, the easiest statement there is, you're not the first time that this has happened. There's lots of people that have gone through this, lots of different emotions, whether it's, again, a bad physical relationship, a bad, a substance abuse relationship, or just a bad, relationship. People have come before you. People have gone through it. And yes, there's always a feeling of guilt. I could have done something different. I shoulda. Well, those are all under the bridge. And the way you move forward with those is you say, I understand where I am today. I'll take responsibility for where I'm at today. And now it's time to move forward. Looking in the rearview mirror is the hardest part, because you can't change it. You can only change where you are today. So the best advice there is just understand, you're not the only one in this circumstance. And, a good wealth advisor, a good attorney will help you through that process to understand, what happened and how you can be okay with yourself and the decisions that you're making moving forward, because this truck doesn't go in reverse. You just have to move forward. That's going to get you to the best place that you're going to be in going forward.
Well, I appreciate your time today. I think that transition planning is something that a lot of people don't talk about. We talk about getting to the entry of judgment, but we don't talk about what's going to look like in the future. So I appreciate all of your guidance. And I hope that if clients are listening or potential, or you're thinking about a divorce, whatever stage in life you are, you can reach out to our firm, or you certainly can talk to Sean or any member of his team and get that advice as well. So thank you so much for your time today, Sean. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.